Thank you, JNU Student Union, and thanks to Rajiv for giving me this opportunity here. And I have known Rajiv for quite a few years now. We have worked together on some of the seminars in US, and there are publications which have come out. And I'm really thankful to JNUSU for organizing this event here, because the students have to be aware of the conspiracies happening everywhere against what is Sanskrit, what is India. Sanskrit has been at a very receiving end actually in India, in post-independence India, and after 19th century, when the Western Indologists created a fashionable branch of study called Sanskritic Indology everywhere in the West, and so many departments open. And initially it appeared that probably they're doing it with right purpose. And later on, Rajiv notes in his book that we have to study someone if we want to destroy him or her. So that could have been the real motive. Sanskritic studies have suffered in the age of Macaulay-inspired education in India. So it has been a unfairly criticized language and unfairly represented language, especially in India. More than in the West, in India we have represented Sanskrit in a much more negative manner, because of mostly of our vote bank politics in the post-independent India that has harmed Sanskrit more than it has harmed India actually. And in the West there has been a negative propaganda in partnership with the Desi intellectuals, and well, I'm included in that, and so I'm critiquing myself, and in that partnership we create a very negative and disrespectful image of Sanskrit. And we do that on one hand. On other hand, we secretly research the fundamental text of Sanskrit to create new ideas and to bring new ideas out of that. And now Sanskrit is the language with highest number of universities, relatively less favored in schools. Why do we not include or encourage Sanskrit in schools? Do we not want students to join colleges and universities? So you see the controversy of Sanskrit versus German and all that. And our kids are progressively being exposed to global content and propaganda in our living rooms. I was watching a television program. Actually, I was working on my laptop. My kid was watching a television program, a Japanese serial translated in Hindi. And there were three kids talking to each other. One kid says to other, "If you do my work, I'll give you an award. Or reward, I'll reward you." The third kid asks, "What will be the reward?" He says, "This kid's wife." So you can reward someone with someone's wife in a foreign culture, not in India. So if kids continue to watch such things in our living rooms, we don't know what kind of citizens we are going to get tomorrow. So this is a very serious problem. Well, in one estimate, 95% of Sanskrit texts are scientific texts. That includes philosophy. But Sanskrit is linked to religion and esoteric practices. And our students in Sanskrit Center are working actually very closely with scientists to do comparative research. We have brightest of traditional scholars, but they can't communicate in the language and vocabulary that the world understands. So we allow the Westerners to study us, critique us, and we don't study them. Rajiv would like us to study them equally well and critique on them. We have largest number of manuscripts that any civilization has produced. There's a one rough estimate, 30 million still waiting to be digitized. But these manuscripts are in better condition and more accessible if they are in foreign country. Well, our students were looking for manuscripts. We found some manuscripts in very good condition in Bangladesh and in Pakistan and in Germany, in Nepal, but not in India. So despite of so much of resources in the country now, we are still a very poor caretaker of our own resources. And that gives more opportunity to outsiders to fish in the troubles. Sanskrit can have opportunities in virtually every field of study, but a lack of proper direction pins it down. And Sanskrit Commission reports, if you want to see the first Sanskrit Commission report, you will get an idea of what I'm saying. Many wonders of modern sciences have sources in Sanskrit, but credit generally goes to the West. Oldest language in the Indo-European family, but it does not get the credit. And if you read Conrad's work and papers, you will be more willing to believe that yes, the Sanskrit actually belonged to this country and it probably went outside from here. Now they constructed a proto-Indo-European fiction to prove a point that the Sanskrit came from the West to India. So the two basic topics that I'm going to briefly touch upon that is very important in Rajiv's book. The Sanskrit relationship with vernaculars and other Indian languages. Now, it's very clear, Panini calls his language as Bhasha. Bhasha is the ordinarily spoken language. As my mother tongue would be Maithili, that's Maithili is Bhasha for me. When the language surveyors go to villages asking for which language you speak, people say, I speak Bhasha. This is the language I speak. Right? Unless you have more than one language in the region, you would just call it Bhasha. You'll not name it A, B, or C. So Panini's language is Bhasha. He writes a grammar for the language, and that language gets Sanskritized and is called Sanskrit afterwards and becomes the main carrier of the intellectual tradition in the country. That's pretty much it. And other languages have drawn heavily from Sanskrit, as we today draw from the dominant language in our region. But there's one thing, something very unusual about Sanskrit, that after Panini's grammar, Sanskrit kind of resisted changes. And that doesn't mean to say that Sanskrit got fossilized or Sanskrit got artificialized, but there was the intellectuals all over the country, they preferred a much more standard language so that they could write and be understood all over the country. If I wrote in standard Sanskrit, I would be understood in South India, in the Western India, in Eastern India, Northern India. If I wrote in a regional variety of Sanskrit, one of the Prakrits or one of the Pali languages, I would be understood only in one of the regions. So therefore, when Buddha promoted Pali, when he was talking to villagers in Bihar or elsewhere, he would certainly use a local variety, which was more commonly understood. But when the scholars of Buddhism chose to write Buddhist philosophy in Pali, they were not understood well all over the country, so they chose then to write in Buddhist hybrid Sanskrit, Sanskrit mixed with Pali. Even that was not sufficient, and finally they switched to Sanskrit. The Mahayana Buddhists switched to Sanskrit completely. That clearly indicates the necessity for scholars to choose a language which is clearly understood all over the country. Something English does it today in India, and of course Hindi is becoming a language of that kind progressively. So Sanskrit's importance has to be understood from various perspectives. I bring in the perspective of technology. Well, look at the figures. As per the census of India, we have 14,000 speakers of Sanskrit and 49,000 speakers of Arabic in this country. That also points out to the fallacy of the methods used by the language surveyors in the country. And my rough estimate would be there are 500,000 Sanskrit speakers in the country. There are 17 universities, 150 departments, hundreds of schools. If you count the students, there will be certainly more than 500,000 people who can speak some Sanskrit. No state owns it, so it is a language which is not regional, except Uttaranchal recently gave it some status. But we can have scholars using Sanskrit all over the country. Something similar to English is not owned by any state, but scholars can speak it all over. Mother of most of Indo-Aryan languages, and in my view, the Dravidian is not really a different family. It's part of the same Indic family, which has two major branches, south of India and north of India. And if you combine that, you have 96% people of the country speaking the Sanskritic languages. You know, if you count the number of vocabulary in South Indian languages, Malayalam has as much as 75% vocabulary. That's the youngest Sanskrit language. And the least vocabulary is in Tamil, which is 49%. So you can imagine the kind of impact Sanskrit has had, not only in vocabulary, but also the Sanskriticism, the ism that Sanskrit actually, in terms of literature, culture, philosophy, and sciences, that it has impacted the languages of India all over. The source of India's intellectual, religious, spiritual power, and common source of vocabulary for, of course, Indian languages and many of the European languages. There are hundreds and thousands of vocabularies of Sanskrit in European languages. Source of much of Indian language, literature, art, and culture, and of course, language of religion. And more importantly for me, it has inspired grammar writing in Indian languages. Now, for a computational linguist, I don't need to write grammars of all Indian languages separately from the computer's perspective. So I write a core grammar, which will have certainly these Sanskrit elements, which will be commonly understood by all the grammars, and then we have plugins, say plugin for Tamil, plugin for Malayalam, and Gujarati, etc. But the common core continues to be. And as an example of it, under Microsoft Research, we did research and came up with a common mechanism to tag all Indian languages. So single mechanism can still tag all Indian languages in India. So there is more to connect Indian languages than to divide us. Now, if you look at the scheduled languages, Indo-Aryan languages are there, and there are 4 Dravidian languages, and 3 languages of the Tibeto-Burman and Austroasiatic. And there are scripts, most of the scripts are Brahmi-based in India, and only 2 scripts, Persia-Arabic and Persia-Arabic script actually is not Brahmi-based. And of course, Roman is not Brahmi-based. So there is a major part of India linguistically, and it owes to Sanskrit and Brahmi. So when Palak says Sanskrit is dead, I don't know what he means actually by that. So Sanskrit is multifaceted, multidisciplinary, and useful. Now, in a commercialized India today, we regard things which are useful to us. Sanskrit is useful. It can be commercialized, can be useful to all Indian languages. So from that perspective also, we should retain Sanskrit and promote it. It is not just any other language. It is more than a language. Professor Rao was saying that Sanskrit is not only a language. There are 17 universities only for language. That makes it an enviable language compared to English. English doesn't have 17 universities in England even. So we have a much more powerful language in India. When this German Sanskrit controversy was going on, the German ambassador had invited me for advice, and I told him, I'm rephrasing it in the local dialect, don't take panga with Sanskrit. It is a very powerful language in India. So you really have to be very careful about it. So Sanskrit is useful. It defines India in many ways, more ways than we can even imagine actually. The many ways, if you go to West, India means Sanskrit, and Sanskrit means India to many people. Linguistic and cultural sustenance for other Indian languages. Now, Indian languages, can you imagine an Indian language today without Sanskrit impact, Sanskrit vocabulary? I mean, there are new classical languages in India. They ask them, what makes you a classical language? You examine their literature. You see the themes of Sanskrit. You see themes of Mahabharata. You see themes of Kavya Shastra. All along, all Indian languages. Yoga and Ayurveda, certainly international entities now, fundamental scientific ideas in Sanskrit. And I had a chance to explore one scientific text called Rasayan Sar, the text of chemistry from Banaras area with the University of Massachusetts. And we have translated that book into English, and it's being researched by 2 PhD students at UMass Dartmouth. And we are going to find something very startling regarding nanoparticles as being used as bioenhancers in US. But the sad part is the US is more interested in such explorations than Indian government actually. Fundamental scientific ideas in Sanskrit texts have to be explored further, and then my area, computational linguistics and AI, and you must have probably heard that Sanskrit is very precise, and it helps being a computer language. Many people do not know what they are saying, but then yes, Sanskrit is very close to being an artificial language for mechanical purposes, and therefore personally, I don't believe that many people should speak Sanskrit. I take a revolutionary position in my department. Now, because if you start speaking Sanskrit very popularly, it starts to change. And when it starts to change, it behaves like an ordinary language. And then machines don't like such ordinary languages. And we want a very mechanical language where we can express commonsensical knowledge to the machine using a natural language like Sanskrit. So it's a powerful tool for artificial intelligence and computational linguistics. It is more powerful because we can develop technology for Indian languages having a common core. It simplifies technology development, it reduces cost, and less requirement for maintaining the software. So therefore, it is much more useful to me particularly, e-learning and animation. So we have done animated Jatak Kathas. You can go to my site, sanskrit.jnu, read Jatak Kathas, see if there's something anti-Sanskrit in them or anti-Hindu in them. Buddhism never opposed Hinduism, Professor Rao rightly said, and Rajiv rightly mentions in his book, that in India, these dichotomies don't exist. People are essentially multicultural, and they respect each other. Even Charavakas have been respected all over the country. It's a essentially a very tolerant society. All the discussion of intolerance in the country actually. So certainly there's a lot that can be done. And briefly, what should be done? Just one of the last slides. Actually, preserve and promote traditional scholarship. That has certainly fallen back. Actually, we haven't given good room to develop a traditional scholarship in the country. Certainly, the Macaulay-inspired education is a big responsibility for that. And we have to preserve and promote our heritage using IT and digital media, because that's what people know today. And we have to translate key Sanskrit texts so that our kids can read original Sanskrit texts and be prepared to answer critiques from people like Sheldon Pollock. Unless they read the original text, they'll not be able to respond to such criticisms from the West. We have to infuse contemporary studies into Sanskrit, certainly, and Sanskrit at all levels in schools, Sanskrit positions in other departments. Now, the scientific department, for example, JNU, a biotechnology researcher can do much better research from our own tradition if he reads or has access to Sanskrit text. So therefore, there's a Sanskrit teacher over there. He can liaison with such scholars and produce some original research in the country, relying on original text of the country. And so, of course, we have to have a manpower training of Sanskrit scholars. My rough estimate is that there are approximately 10,000 grad students doing Sanskrit studies in the country. So we hope to do training of all of them sometime in near future and be able to turn a tide. So, well, thank you very much. I don't want to actually continue next. Many of you will probably can go to my site and see what we do in JNU. So thank you very much, and I hope there will be some questions.